James had been alone for 2 years. Inside his underground bunker, time passed in slow, repetitive cycles. Wake up, eat, check the perimeter cameras, listen to the dead radio signals, sleep. Every day was the same. No change, no hope, just the cold, crushing silence of a world that no longer existed. The surface was unlivable. The sky had turned black after the catastrophe, and the air was thick with poison. James had seen the destruction through his bunker's cameras. Burned out buildings, skeletal remains of cities, and no signs of life. He was alone. At least, that's what he thought. Until tonight. James sat at his small metal table, eating canned beans straight from the tin. The dull hum of the bunker's generators was the only sound in the cramped space. His eyes drifted to the security monitors, as they did every night. Nothing. Just the same desolate wasteland. Then, he heard it. A sound that didn't belong. A whisper. Soft. Faint. Almost drowned out by the bunker systems. James froze. His heart pounded against his ribs. He turned his head slightly, listening. Nothing. Maybe it was his mind playing tricks on him. Maybe the isolation was finally getting to him. He exhaled, shaking his head, and reached for his water bottle. Then he heard it again. Help me. James dropped the bottle. His blood ran cold. The whisper wasn't coming from inside the bunker. It was coming from outside. The impossible presence. For a moment, James didn't move. His mind raced. This is impossible. There was no one left alive. The last radio signal had gone silent over a year ago. Then who was outside? He grabbed his rifle and slowly walked to the control panel. His fingers hovered over the camera feed buttons, hesitating for just a second. Then he pressed play. The screen flickered, showing the outside world. Dark, cold, lifeless. And then, movement. James's breath caught in his throat. A figure stood at the entrance of his bunker. Small, thin, wrapped in what looked like torn cloth. The person collapsed against the thick metal door, shaking. James leaned in, squinting at the screen. Something was off. The person's skin glowed faintly. A soft, bluish light pulsed from under the rags, spreading across their arms like delicate veins. Not human. James felt his stomach tighten. For 2 years, he had believed he was the last survivor. But now, something else was outside his bunker. And it was asking for help. Fear versus curiosity. James' first instinct was to ignore it. This had to be a trick, a trap. The world outside was dead. There was no way anything could have survived out there, let alone something that looked alien. He should just wait. Eventually, whatever it was would leave. If it didn't, well, he had enough weapons to make sure it wouldn't be a problem. But then, the figure slumped forward against the door. It wasn't trying to break in. It wasn't attacking. It was weak. Dying. James clenched his jaw. His gut twisted in conflict. For 2 years, he had lived by one rule: don't take risks. But another voice in his head whispered, what if this is something else? What if it's not a threat? What if it needs you? He sighed and pressed another button. The camera zoomed in. The figure was a girl, barely conscious. Her golden eyes flickered open for a second, filled with something James hadn't seen in a long time. Not fear, not aggression, desperation. She pressed a trembling hand against the door. Her lips moved. James didn't need the microphone to hear it. Please. His grip tightened on the rifle. His heart told him to open the door. His mind told him to leave her out there. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. Seconds stretched into eternity. James took a deep breath. And then he moved toward the door. James stood in front of the bunker door, rifle in hand, heart pounding in his chest. He had 2 options. Ignore her. Let whatever was left of the world take her. It wasn't his problem. Open the door. Take a risk for something. Someone. who shouldn't even exist. For 2 years, he had lived by one rule: survive. Helping people wasn't part of the plan. But she wasn't a person, was she? James exhaled sharply and looked back at the monitor. The alien girl was still there, barely moving. Her skin had a strange, faint glow, and the golden light in her eyes was fading. She was running out of time. His fingers hesitated over the control panel. If he let her in, it could be a trap. But if he didn't, she would die. James closed his eyes for a brief second, and then, before he could change his mind, he hit the unlock button. The moment of no return. A deep hiss filled the bunker as the thick steel door unsealed itself. Cold, dead air from the outside rushed in, mixing with the warmth of the bunker. James kept his rifle raised, his body tense. The girl didn't move. He stepped forward cautiously, keeping his weapon ready. Up close, she looked fragile. Her breathing was shallow, her skin covered in a thin layer of dust and dried blood. Strange, glowing markings ran along her arms, flickering weakly. James knelt beside her. "Hey," he muttered. "You still alive?" Her eyes fluttered open slightly. She saw him, really saw him. Then she whispered one word: "Cold." James hesitated. She was shaking violently. His mind screamed at him to be careful, but his instincts, something deeper than survival, told him what he needed to do. With a quiet curse, James scooped her up into his arms and carried her inside. The bunker doors sealed shut behind them. James laid the girl on the old cot in the corner of the room. She barely weighed anything. Too light, too weak. He grabbed a blanket and threw it over her. Then, without thinking, he reached for a bottle of water and held it out. "Here." She didn't take it. Her golden eyes flickered up to meet his. "Not water," she murmured. James frowned. "What do you mean, not water?" She hesitated, then turned her head slightly, exposing the side of her neck. Two small, sharp fangs peeked out from under her lips. James froze. Everything in his body screamed danger. She wasn't just an alien. She was something else, something that needed more than water to survive. The realization hit him like a hammer. She was hungry. For blood. James took a slow step back, his grip tightening around his rifle. The girl's eyes darkened. She had seen the fear in his face. She turned away, pulling the blanket tighter around herself, curling up as if trying to disappear. She already knew. He wouldn't help her. She was alone. Again. James swallowed hard, his mind racing. If she was lying, he was dead. But if she was telling the truth, she wouldn't last the night. He looked down at his hand, at his own blood pumping beneath his skin, his own survival hanging in the balance. Was he really about to do this? Was he really about to feed a creature that shouldn't exist? James took a slow, deep breath. Then, before he could talk himself out of it, he grabbed his knife and cut his palm. The first drop of blood hit the floor. The girl's golden eyes widened instantly. Her entire body tensed. James clenched his jaw. "You need this to survive." Her voice was a whisper. "Yes." James swallowed hard and extended his bleeding hand. The girl stared at him, in shock, in disbelief. Then, with slow hesitation, she reached for him. Her fingers brushed against his skin, then her lips. Then, everything changed. The taste of humanity. James didn't breathe. His mind screamed at him to pull back, to grab his rifle, to stop this before it was too late. But he didn't, because in front of him, the alien girl, weak, trembling, and barely holding on, looked at his bleeding hand like it was the only thing keeping her alive. Her golden eyes flickered, filled with hunger, but also something else. Fear. She was afraid of what she was about to do. James clenched his jaw. "Are you going to kill me?" She swallowed hard, shaking her head. "I don't. I won't take much." James exhaled sharply. "Then do it before I change my mind." Her fingers trembled as they wrapped gently around his wrist. Then her lips pressed against his palm. A sharp, sudden sting, then warmth. James stiffened. His body felt strange. His heartbeat slowed, not in a way that felt deadly, but controlled, like his body was adjusting to something unnatural. The girl's breath hitched. Her grip on his wrist tightened, but she was careful, deliberate. She wasn't feeding like a wild animal. She was drinking like she was afraid of taking too much. James expected pain, but instead, he felt calm, almost connected to something deeper. The girl suddenly gasped and pulled away, stumbling backward onto the cot. Her golden eyes were glowing now. Her entire body pulsed with renewed energy. She pressed a hand to her chest, breathing heavily, as if something inside her had just reawakened. James clenched his fist. The cut on his palm was already sealing itself. "What the hell?" he muttered. The girl's hands trembled. "Your blood. It's—" She trailed off, looking at him like he was something impossible. James wiped his palm on his shirt, still staring at her. "You feeling better?" She nodded slowly, but her eyes never left his. Then she whispered something that made his stomach drop. "You're not like the others." The unwanted truth. James frowned. "What do you mean, the others?" She hesitated, glancing toward the bunker door. Her fingers dug into the blanket wrapped around her. "You're different," she murmured. "Your blood isn't like the ones before." James' breath hitched. "Before." She swallowed hard. "The others. The ones that didn't survive." His blood turned cold. She had fed before, and they had died. His grip tightened around the handle of his knife. "How many?" She flinched. "I didn't mean to." James took a step forward. "How many?" She lowered her head. "3." James exhaled sharply, his mind racing. 3 people. 3 survivors. She had taken their blood, and they hadn't made it. So why was he still standing? He watched her closely, searching for a sign of deception. But instead, he saw guilt. Real, painful guilt. She wasn't lying. She had tried to be careful, and they had still died. But James was fine. No, he was more than fine. His body felt stronger, sharper, like something had been unlocked. "What the hell did you do to me?" he whispered. The girl hesitated, then slowly shook her head. "I don't think I did anything. I think you were already different." The footsteps outside. Before James could process what that meant, the bunker's alarm suddenly blared. His instincts flared. He spun toward the monitor. Something was outside. A girl's face went pale. "They found me." James clenched his jaw and pulled up the security cameras. At first, there was nothing but darkness. Then, movement. Tall, shadowy figures, wrapped in black armor, moving slowly, scanning the ground. James' stomach twisted. These weren't humans. They weren't scavengers. They were hunters. He turned back to the girl. "Who the hell are they?" She swallowed hard. "The ones who destroyed your world." James' breath caught. His world. He had been told Earth was wiped out by a natural disaster. Storms, fires, and atmosphere collapse. But this— "You're saying they did this," he whispered. She nodded. "And they don't leave survivors." A loud thud shook the bunker. James grabbed his rifle. The camera screen flickered. The armored figures were closer now. A deep mechanical voice echoed through the bunker's speakers. "Survivor identified. Open the door." James' blood ran cold. They knew he was here. His bunker had been hidden for 2 years. No one had ever found him. Until she showed up. His hands tightened on his weapon. "You led them here," he muttered. The girl shook her head violently. "No, I swear. They were already looking for you." A second thud, louder this time. The lights flickered. James cursed. "They're trying to break in." The girl's golden eyes darkened. "They won't stop," she said quietly. James exhaled sharply. He had one choice now. Fight. Or run. But running meant leaving the only safe place he had left. Another loud boom echoed through the room. Then, the power cut out, and the door started unlocking on its own. Nowhere left to hide. The bunker door hissed, its locking mechanism failing as the power flickered. James grabbed his rifle, heart hammering against his ribs. He had spent 2 years underground, safe from whatever had destroyed the world. But now they were here, and they were coming for him. A deep mechanical voice echoed through the bunker speakers. Human survivor detected. You will not resist. James tightened his grip on his weapon. Yeah, watch me. The alien girl flinched as the lights flickered again, casting eerie shadows across the room. She knew what was coming. They won't let you live, she said, her voice barely a whisper. James glanced at her. Then I guess we have something in common. The bunker's emergency alarms blared, flashing red across the monitors. The external door was failing. They were inside. The girl's golden eyes widened in terror. James, we have to run. He hesitated. This was his home, his safe place. But deep down he knew. This wasn't a bunker anymore. It was a death trap. The first encounter. The metal door finally gave way, groaning as it slid open. Cold, sterile air rushed in, carrying the scent of something unnatural. And then they stepped inside. James had seen some nightmares before. But these things, they weren't just nightmares. They were death itself. Tall, twisted figures, wrapped in black segmented armor, their faces hidden behind smooth, reflective masks that gave away nothing. Their bodies were too perfect, too machine-like, yet organic at the same time. One of them tilted its head. The empty void of its mask stared directly at James. Then it spoke. Human anomaly confirmed. James's pulse spiked. Anomaly. What the hell did that mean? The girl grabbed his arm. We have to go. Now. James aimed his rifle at the nearest figure and fired. The bullet hit its chest and did nothing. The creature took a single step forward. James fired again. Nothing. His stomach twisted. Oh, that's not good. The creature lifted a long, clawed hand, and the very air around James shifted. Gravity lurched. The room distorted. His body locked up, frozen in place. He couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. It was like the very universe was rejecting him. The figure spoke again, its voice cold and mechanical. You are not supposed to exist. James's vision blurred. The pressure around his skull tightened, crushing him. He was going to die. And then, the girl screamed. Her golden eyes flared, and the strange markings along her arms ignited with glowing energy. The bunker shook violently. The pressure vanished, and James collapsed onto the ground, gasping. The creature staggered back, just for a second. It was enough. James didn't hesitate. He grabbed the girl's wrist. Move. The great escape. They ran. James knew every corridor, every emergency tunnel in the bunker. He had designed it for survival, but he had never imagined he'd be fleeing from something like this. The girl was faster than him, way faster. She barely seemed to touch the ground, her movements fluid and inhuman. James's lungs burned, but he pushed forward. Behind them, the creatures didn't chase. They glided, silent, effortless, unstoppable. James slammed his fist into a keypad, activating the emergency blast door. The metal slammed shut behind them. For a second, there was silence. James turned to the girl, breathless. What the hell did you just do? She was shaking. Her golden eyes dimmed, her markings still flickering with strange energy. She looked at him, and for the first time, James saw it. She was just as afraid as he was. I don't know, she whispered. The revelation. James pulled up his sleeve. His arm still tingled where the alien girl had grabbed him. He didn't know what was happening, But he knew one thing. The moment she drank his blood, everything changed. The creatures had called him an anomaly. They didn't just want her. They wanted him. James clenched his fists. "All right," he muttered. "No more running." The girl looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" James exhaled. "We're going to find out who the hell they are." The bunker was gone. His old life. Over. And now, he wasn't just fighting to survive. He was fighting to understand what he had become. The hunt has begun. The bunker was gone. James and the alien girl stood in the dead wasteland, the cold wind cutting through them like a knife. The world was silent, too silent. Behind them, the hidden entrance to the bunker was now a crater, reduced to nothing but twisted metal and scorched earth. The girl's breathing was shaky, her golden eyes scanning the darkness. James tightened his grip on his rifle, even though he already knew. Bullets wouldn't help. Not against them. "They won't stop now," she whispered. James didn't turn to her. He was already watching the horizon. They never planned to stop. Because this wasn't just an attack. It was a hunt. And now he was the prey. The first warning. James didn't know where they were going, but staying in one place was suicide. They moved fast, sticking to the shadows of collapsed skyscrapers and ruined highways, moving across what had once been a city but was now a graveyard. The girl barely made a sound, her movements unnaturally light. James, he was human. He wasn't built to be silent. Every step felt too loud, every breath too sharp. And then, a sound cut through the silence. A low, clicking noise. James froze. The girl grabbed his arm. "Don't move." James didn't blink. His hands tightened around his weapon. His instincts screamed danger. Then, from the darkness, something moved. A figure shifted in the ruins ahead, standing unnaturally still. Not like a soldier. Not like a person. Like a predator waiting for its prey to make a mistake. James swallowed hard. His finger hovered over the trigger. It wouldn't do anything, but it made him feel less helpless. The girl whispered, "They're testing us." James didn't look away. Testing us for what? She inhaled sharply, to see if we're worth the effort of chasing. James' pulse spiked. If they moved wrong, if they ran too soon, they would be hunted forever. James' mind raced. There had to be a way out. And then he realized something. The creature wasn't alone. In the distance, another stood completely still. And another. And another. They were surrounded. James clenched his jaw. Running wasn't an option anymore. The fight that shouldn't be possible. The air crackled. One of the figures twitched. Then another. And then they attacked. Fast. Too fast. James didn't think, he reacted. He pushed the girl aside and raised his rifle, firing point blank. The first bullet hit dead center. It didn't stop the creature, but it staggered. James blinked. That wasn't supposed to happen. These things didn't react to bullets. So why did it flinch? Another lunged. James moved on instinct, sidestepping and slamming the butt of his rifle into its head. The creature stumbled. It felt wrong. Lighter than it should be. Not indestructible. The girl's golden eyes widened. James, something's different. James knew it too. Something had changed. And he had a sick feeling he knew exactly why. It was him. Becoming the hunter. One of the creatures recovered and lunged again. But this time, James was ready. He moved faster than he ever had before. Not like a human. Like something else. His vision sharpened. His muscles reacted before he could think. He twisted, slamming his knee into the creature's chest. The force sent it flying backward, crashing into the rubble. The other figures hesitated. James saw it in them. A flicker of uncertainty. The hunters had never faced prey that could fight back. James took a slow step forward, his breath steady. His heart wasn't racing in fear. It was steady. controlled. His blood burned with a power he didn't understand yet. But he didn't need to understand it, because for the first time since this nightmare began, they were afraid of him. The girl stared at him, realization dawning in her eyes. "James, you're changing." James exhaled. He knew. The moment she had taken his blood, something had unlocked. And now he wasn't just a survivor. Now he was something new. The creatures retreat. The remaining figures stood still, their bodies unnaturally stiff. For the first time, they didn't attack. James could feel it. They were reassessing. One of them tilted its head, speaking in a mechanical, empty voice. "Human anomaly confirmed." James felt a chill crawl down his spine. They had called him that before. The creatures stepped backward. Then, one by one, vanished into the darkness. James let out a slow breath. They left. The girl shook her head. "No," she said, her voice low. "They just decided you're not prey anymore." James stared at the spot where the creatures had disappeared. For 2 years, he had been the one hiding, running. Not anymore. Now they were the ones walking away. The girl swallowed. "James, what are you?" James tightened his grip on his rifle. "I don't know," he muttered. But he was going to find out. Because whatever he had become, it was something that even the monsters feared. The fear of gods. The world was silent again. The creatures had left. Not because they had won. Not because they had failed. But because they didn't know what to do. James had changed. And the monsters that had hunted humanity for centuries had felt it. Now, they were afraid. The realization. James stood in the rubble, his breath steady, his heart slower than it should be. He should be exhausted. He should be injured. But he wasn't. His muscles were loose, his mind clear, his body reacting faster than it ever had before. The alien girl stared at him, her golden eyes filled with something new. It wasn't just shock. It was awe. "James," she whispered, "you're not human anymore." James clenched his fists. He could feel it, the burning power inside him. "What did you do to me?" he asked, his voice calm, even. She shook her head. "It wasn't me." She took a slow step closer. "It was you." James narrowed his eyes. "What the hell does that mean?" She hesitated. Then, finally, she said it. "Humans were never supposed to survive this war." The truth about humanity. James frowned. "War?" The girl exhaled, looking up at the blackened sky. "There was never a natural disaster, James. There was never an accident." She turned back to him, her face haunted. "They wiped out your people because they were afraid of you." James went still. The words felt wrong. They felt impossible. But deep down, he knew. He had felt the shift in his body, the raw, untamed potential. The hunters had realized it too. James wasn't just a survivor. He was something else, something dangerous. The girl spoke again, her voice trembling. "You're not just an anomaly, James." She swallowed hard. "You're the last of something they couldn't control. The experiment that never failed." James clenched his jaw. "You're saying we were a threat?" She nodded. "More than you can imagine." Her golden eyes darkened. "They tried to break your kind, to erase you, but something inside your people refused to die." She exhaled sharply. "They wiped out your species because they feared what you might become." James looked down at his hands. They looked normal, but they weren't. His blood burned. His vision was sharper. His body was something more. And the creatures that had killed billions had retreated at the first sign of his power. James clenched his fists. The ones who had hunted him were now the ones running. And for the first time in his life, he was the one chasing. The elders take notice. The sky above them shifted. James felt it first. A deep, crawling sensation along his spine. The girl's body stiffened. Her breath hitched. "They know," she whispered. James' muscles tensed. Who? Her golden eyes flickered. The elders. James frowned. The hell are the elders? The ground shook. A deep, rumbling voice echoed through the air. You are not supposed to exist. James looked up, and then he saw them. The arrival of the true monsters. From the sky, black shapes descended. Unlike the hunters, these beings didn't just glide. They warped reality itself. Their bodies were shapeless, shifting like liquid shadows wrapped in twisted armor. James' gut screamed at him. These weren't just soldiers. They were something worse. One of the creatures spoke, its voice like 1,000 whispers crawling over each other. The last human is incomplete. Another tilted its head, yet he still survives. James squared his shoulders, his blood thrumming like a slow-burning wildfire. You're late, he said. Your pets already ran away. The elders didn't react. They weren't like the others. They didn't need to test him. They already knew. You will surrender, the tallest one said, its form shifting in and out of existence. You will be remade. James exhaled. Then slowly he grinned. Try me. The elders moved, and the world exploded. The first strike. James didn't think. He reacted. One of the elders lunged, its form twisting like a shadow tearing through reality. James' body moved before his mind could catch up. His arm snapped up, and he caught the creature's wrist. The elder froze. James clenched his grip. And then, for the first time in history, an elder screamed. James' eyes flashed bright red. Power surged through his body, something ancient, something raw, something that had been buried in his kind for centuries. James grinned. You're afraid of me, he whispered. The elder struggled, its shapeless body twisting violently. Impossible. James pulled it closer. No, he said. I'm inevitable. And then, he crushed its arm in his grip. The fall of the gods. The remaining elders reacted instantly, moving as one. James moved faster. One tried to erase him from existence. James twisted and ripped its mask off, exposing the screaming void beneath. Another tried to shatter his bones with gravity. James dodged and slammed his fist through its chest. The sky boiled. The ruins shook, and for the first time in history, the elders hesitated. James wiped blood from his lips, standing amidst the fallen gods. I thought you were supposed to be powerful, he muttered. The tallest elder staggered back. Its entire form flickered. We were wrong, it whispered. James took a slow step forward. No, he said, his voice low. Dangerous. You were right. And then, the last elder ran. The gods had fallen. And James was just getting started. The last human ascends. The last elder vanished into the void. The gods of the universe, the architects of humanity's extinction, had done something they had never done before. They ran. James stood in the ruins of what was once their battleground, his breath steady, his heart unfazed. He could still feel the power coursing through his veins, like a fire that had been burning for centuries, waiting to be unleashed. The alien girl stood beside him, her golden eyes wide in shock. The hunters had retreated. The elders had fled. James had won. But something deep inside him knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The warning left behind. The wind howled through the shattered ruins. James knelt beside the body of a fallen elder, staring at the mask it had worn. The thing was cracked, its once glowing symbols now dim and lifeless. He lifted it slowly, turning it in his hands. The girl stepped forward cautiously. James, what are you doing? James didn't answer. He could feel something in the mask. A memory, a whisper of a lost war. Then, a voice slithered into his mind. You are an error in the design. James' fingers clenched around the mask. His body tensed. The girl flinched. James, you were never meant to exist. The world flickered. For a brief second, James saw something else. a massive, endless empire stretching across the stars. A civilization built on erasing anything that could challenge them. The elders weren't rulers. They were prison guards. And humanity. Humanity had been a mistake they had tried to bury. James snapped out of it, his breath sharp. He looked at the girl. His voice was steady. "I know where they are." Her golden eyes widened. "James, no. We need tow." "I'm not running anymore," he said, tossing the mask aside. "They tried to erase me. Erase all of us." His red eyes burned. "Now, I'm going to erase them." The Forgotten War. James and the girl walked through the ruins, their steps eerily quiet. She was afraid. Not of the elders. Of him. James felt it too. The changes inside him weren't just making him stronger. They were making him something else. "Tell me the truth," he said suddenly. The girl hesitated. "About what?" James stopped walking. He turned to her, his gaze sharp. "You knew." She swallowed hard. "Knew what?" James clenched his fists. "That I wasn't just a survivor." Silence. Then, softly, she whispered, "I didn't know for sure." James took a slow breath. "But you suspected." Her golden eyes flickered. "I told you before, James. Humans weren't wiped out because they were weak." James exhaled. "Because we were something worse." She nodded slowly. James looked up at the blackened sky. "They tried to erase us," he muttered, "but they didn't finish the job." His lips curled into a cold grin. "Now I'm going to show them why that was a mistake." The gates of the Forgotten Empire. The air shimmered. James' vision shifted, and suddenly he wasn't on Earth anymore. The ruins, the wasteland, the broken cities, they all blurred away. Instead, he stood on a platform floating in endless darkness. The alien girl gasped. "James, how did you?" James didn't know. But deep down, he understood. He wasn't just seeing this place. He was summoned here. Before them stood a massive black gate, carved from a material that seemed to absorb all light. And behind it, the home of the elders, the heart of their empire. James felt no fear, only purpose. "You shouldn't have come," a voice rasped. James turned. A single elder stood before him, different from the others. Older, stronger. James' fingers curled into fists. "I disagree." The elder tilted its head. "You don't know what you are." James smiled, stepping forward. "That's the difference between us." The elder stiffened. James' eyes burned. "I don't need to know what I am." He cracked his knuckles. "I just need to know what I can do." And then he attacked. The first and last war. The elder moved faster than anything James had fought before. Its body shifted like liquid, its attacks coming from every angle at once. James dodged, twisted, countered. His body reacted before his mind could process it. And then, in a single strike, James tore through the elder's defenses. The creature screamed, a sound that shattered the silence of the void. For the first time, the gates behind it trembled. James had never fought a war before, but somehow, deep inside, he knew what this was. This wasn't just a fight. This was the first strike of something greater. The elder staggered back, clutching its wounds. "You don't understand what you are," it gasped. James stood tall. "No." He clenched his fists. "But I know what I'm going to do." And then, with a single step, James shattered the gates of the Elder Empire. Epilogue. The legend begins. Somewhere, across the vast reaches of the universe, the elders watched in horror. The alarms of their empire screamed. A single name echoed through the void, one they had tried to erase, a name that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. Human. The mistake they had spent centuries trying to destroy had returned. But James Walker wasn't just a human anymore. He was something new, something greater, something that even the gods of the void could not stop. And as the first true war in centuries began, one truth became clear. James wasn't here to survive. He was here to win. The end. For now.